My name is Rick Armstrong, and my brother is Rusty Armstrong, who is severely autistic.
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have one sister and three brothers.
How old were you when Rusty was born?
Well, he was born in 1958, so I would have been 5 years old. Just barely, a couple of months, 5 years and 2 months.
Did they know immediately something was off or that he was not normal?
By they, do you mean the doctors?
Yeah.
To my knowledge, the doctors didn't spot anything wrong, but my mother did.
How did your mom spot something wrong?
And I'm not sure it happened at birth that she spotted it wrong, but I think within the first several months she suspected. I'm trying to remember the conversations we had, but I think she realized that Rusty would cry a lot. Not that only born infants cry a lot, but he seemed to not be consolable and would not react quite as well and as affectionately to her as you would expect a baby to. So she thought it was.
So he wasn't affectionate? Would he pull away?
I'm not sure if that happened as an infant right away or if that developed later, but yeah, there was some of that.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember your parents' reaction once they found out the news?
I don't. I doubt I was there when they found out the news and confirmed. And you need to understand also that there was nobody standing there saying Rusty's autistic. You see, autism was a very obscure, little-known condition back then. In the late 50s, I doubt there was anybody really talking about it. Most pediatricians knew nothing about it at all. So all they knew is that there was something wrong. And my mother would go to countless doctors, pediatricians, specialists, and say, I know there's something wrong. He's not progressing like my other children did. He was the last of 5, so she had a pretty good idea how fast children should develop. And you know, he's not as affectionate. He pulls away. He's not as verbal as time went on. So it took many years for my parents to begin to realize, and a lot of trial and error to realize that this was not a typical condition.
What kind of treatments did they use, if any?
Well, at first there really were no treatments. It was more of experimentation with different doctors to find out what might be going on. But I do remember the first real treatments that I can recall were a result of their having gone to Media, Pennsylvania, where there was a clinic called the Domodelicato Clinic. And at that time, these two doctors had written extensively and researched about brain injury. And this was well before we suspected autism. At this point in Rusty's life, I want to say this probably started in about 1965 or so that they read about it. They checked into it, they took him back there, they ran a bunch of tests, and came up with the conclusion that he was brain injured, probably at birth or before birth. And the treatments that came out of that were several. One was something that we call patterning, and that was something that required several times a day for Rusty to be laid prone on a table, face down, and for 2 people to be on one side, 2 people to be on the other side. Think about it. I take it back. 1 person on one side, 1 person on the other side, and then somebody holding his head at the front of the table. So it took 3 people. And what would happen would be that you would alternately move his arms and legs in a position that would approximate or duplicate what you would see a child doing who is learning to crawl on the floor. Because when a child learns to walk, they go through several stages. One is they crawl with their stomach on the floor. Then they move to the stage where they creep, is at least what Domodelicato called it. They call it creeping, to and that would be walking on hands and knees. And then finally they learn how to stand up and then walk. Well, the theory behind this treatment was that because brain injured children skipped over some of those steps, they never properly learned how to walk. They never properly, more accurately, their brain never properly learned how to function sequentially in such a way that it taught them the proper way to learn in general. So the notion was that if you take him through these patterning exercises several times a day, that you will reteach his brain the proper developmental sequence so that he will eventually learn how to think and talk and develop like other children. So we did that several times a day. And it was quite difficult because, let's say you were traveling, you had to pull off on the road, get off the side of the road, find a flat surface, or have one with you and pattern. You couldn't miss one of these scheduled patternings. We also had to. My folks actually were told that they needed to take a pair of shoes, tennis shoes, I think is what they used, and they had to attach dowels to the bottom of the shoes, about 3 of them, so that Rusty was incapable of standing up. He had to literally creep around the house all the time if he wanted to get somewhere. Around 7, 8 years old, so that was difficult for him. He had to walk, creep on his hands and knees, and that was one of the other treatments. They also, I remember, did some things with his eyes. They were given a pen light, and we had to sit in a dark room with Rusty, and we had to, for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, we had to make his eyes move a certain way, and it's very hazy now, it's been so long ago, but I know it involved the following of a pen light. I guess you'd call this a treatment, sure you would. It's, we had a mask that we bought, and the mask was constructed of plastic. It had a little nose thing, kind of like the ones you see that people use to help their snoring when they go to bed, as a treatment. And then elastic that held it over your mouth. And it was a bag about yay big, held on the back of your head with an elastic band. And then it had a little narrow plastic tube that came out the other side. And you were to put that mask on Rusty for a minute at a time. And you do that several times a day as a treatment. And I'm not sure what the basis for that treatment was. Those are the major treatments that come to mind. I'm sure there were some others.
Through all of these treatments, did Uncle Rusty get upset when they call him about it?
Well, I'm sure he did, but you got to keep in mind too that at this time in his development he was so upset anyway. Because he had self-destructive behavior, so that he'd dig at his forehead with his hand, scratch himself up. He would have what most people would call maybe tantrums, but were just basically exhibitions of behavior that showed that he was in distress. You didn't know quite how to handle him. He'd have to leave the room all the time because he couldn't take noise. He rarely would hurt anybody else. It was mostly himself. Because of all those things, it was almost as though breaking that routine, breaking those reactions by forcing him to concentrate on something else, even if it was a distasteful thing to do, that might have been something that kind of broke that for him. I don't know. We did, I think this came later on in his treatment. After going to Delicado, we did some behavioral modification.
Did Rusty attend public school?
He never attended public school. At that time, special ed did exist, but it was in its infancy, and special education was not anywhere near equipped to handle somebody who was autistic, much less as severely autistic as Rusty was.
Do you know what kind of education he did get?
Yes, and I use the term education broadly, but tried to get him to identify. We could get him to identify letters and certain numbers, but we could never get him to put them together in words and sentences. So that obviously made it relatively impossible for him to enter the public school system. And there really wasn't anything. Inevitably, they wound up putting him in a school. They'd put him in environments where special kids had to go because there was no other place for them. And it was always a poor fit. So they would put him in there, and they realized it wasn't the best of what they could really find. They couldn't get what they needed, but it was better than the public school system, and it was certainly better than leaving him at home.
How did Rusty react with you and siblings and your friends?
Depending on what kind of a day he was having. If, you know, some days were better than others. If he was having a good day, you didn't do anything ill-advised like play loud rock music or do something really crazy, Rusty could actually be enjoyable to be around. Sometimes you could get him to sit there for a little while and listen to you and interact at some level, although, again, if he couldn't talk in complete sentences. Just to give you one example that was a common occurrence with Rusty, still is. It's a trait that is common to autistic and aphasic children, and it's called echoic. And it means you say something to them, instead of responding to it, they repeat back what you said. It was hard many times to have a meaningful conversation. The people that would come over would just have to understand. We'd explain to them early on, we have an autistic brother. We love him very much, but he can't take a lot of loud noises. He can't take a lot of unexpected stimuli. In our house, one of the rules we had to keep everything kind of quiet. Not hospital quiet, but at a subdued level, because if Rusty was around, he might get upset. And we had friends over. We couldn't do like a lot of kids do and have friends over and have parties, things like that. They had to understand that Rusty was different, and then our household was different as a result.
Oh, wait, hold on.
Ricky.
Devin?
Yeah.
Ricky? And who am I? Who am I?
Mary.
Yes, it's so good. Do you remember her?
Get your face ready. That's it. That's
Who's this right here? Nina?
Nina.
Do you remember him?
Rafa. Ricky.
He looks a little like me, but he's like nephew and niece. So nephew and niece.
Chris.